Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to a very special webinar on unemployment insurance and fraud, what businesses need to know. This is Bob Burge. I'm with the Indiana Department of Workforce Development. Thanks for joining us today. We have literally hundreds of people registered for today's program, so I'm going to stall for just a moment to do some housekeeping items. I first want to let you know about your audio selection. You have a couple different options. You can do the voice over IP through your computer directly, or you can dial in. I know some of you that we've heard from are actually driving right now, so you have the drive-in telephone option. If you get some feedback, that may mean that you have a couple different audio settings open. If there are more than one of you in a room, for example, that can cause some feedback. So we hope you have a good audio selection made today, and so wanted to pass that out. You're going to get a lot of information today. Don't worry, you'll be getting a copy by registering today. You'll be getting a recording, a link to the recording tomorrow about this time, where you can go back and review, and you can share it with others on your team. So we often get the question, will I get a copy of today's slides? And the answer is yes, they'll come in the form of the recording tomorrow that you'll receive. Questions are a real important part of these webinars that we do, and so please send us your questions. We're not going to be able to get to all of them today. Your lines are muted, but with those that we don't get to, someone from the team here will get back in touch with you. So with that, we're very excited to have with us our Commissioner Fred Payne from DWD. Commissioner, you want to kick things off?
Yes, thank you, Bob. So good afternoon. We're here today to have a little discussion about fraud. Unfortunately, fraud exists in America. It exists all over the place. When we have the high volume that we have of dollars being administered in any program, the fraud increases. And unfortunately, right now, we have high volume of unemployment with high volumes of claims being determined and high dollar amounts being administered throughout the country. So we continue to evolve our unemployment insurance system to make sure that we're addressing all the fraud that we're seeing. We're evolving our technology, we're evolving our people capability. But one of the best assets that we have really is our employer knowledge. The more knowledge that employers have of fraud, how to detect fraud, how to work with us about fraud, the better off we are. So this webinar is designed to give you as much knowledge as you can receive from us in how to address, how to detect, and how to work with us on this issue of fraud. Unfortunately, we can't eliminate it, but we can do the best that we can to control it, to detect it, and to do something with it when we know it exists. So hopefully you get a lot out of the seminar today, this webinar, and please ask a lot of questions because we have a team of people who are here willing and able to address those questions, and maybe we can just stop as much of this fraud as we can. So thank you very much for your time.
Thanks, Commissioner Payne. And let's we're going to start things here with we're going to do a quick polling question for everybody. We want to ask the question: have you or someone in your organization been a victim of identity theft as it relates to unemployment insurance? So let's throw that out for a minute here and see what the numbers are polling in. Wow, this tells a story in itself right here. So let me close it out, and I'm going to share the results. What do you think, Commissioner? It kind of tells us it's out there, right? Okay, so you saw those numbers. About 3 out of 4 people on today's program have experienced some form of identity theft. So with that, let's get things kicked off, and I'm going to turn it over to our Chief of Staff. Well, let me introduce who's going to be on today. You'll see Josh Richardson, our Chief of Staff. Gina Ashley, she's had quite a year, and she's you'll see the head of our UI department and also serves as our Workforce Solutions Officer. Jennifer Chappelle, you're going to hear from in just a second, and as well as our UI compliance person. We call it heavy fraud. Aaron will be on in just a moment. So with that, let's kick things off with Josh Richardson.
Yeah, thank you, Bob. I appreciate that. And again, repeating some of what the commissioner said, thank you all for joining today. It's absolutely the case that employers are a major source of information that we receive that helps us prevent unemployment fraud. 3 out of 4 of you have experienced UI fraud in your organization, and the Department of Workforce Development itself has experienced attempted fraudulent claims against our own employees. So as an employer, we've experienced this as well. Major headlines today in the news out of California and Kansas on UI fraud stories, but really no state seems to be immune from this, and Indiana isn't either, though we have worked very hard to protect the state's resources. And so I'm going to talk with you just to set up, I think, today's talk a little bit. You'll hear more from the experts on fraud and how you interact. But I think one of the pieces that I wanted to talk about here in the beginning is our unemployment insurance trust fund. And I think this is helpful just to sort of wrap your mind around sort of why it is that employers are vested in this issue. But I don't want to confuse things either. So a lot of the fraud that's come into the UI program today has to do with some of these new federal actions. Again, we'll talk more about that as we go on today, sort of why it is that fraud has really picked up right now. But these federal programs are federally funded. They're separate from our UI trust fund. So the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program is by far and away where we're experiencing the most fraud. We experience fraud across our program, and we always have, but the real uptick seems to be related to that PUA program. But that doesn't keep me from wanting to talk about the UI trust fund itself a little bit. Obviously, they're all tax dollars at the end of the day. But specifically, we're still paying out state unemployment benefits. So to individuals that qualify under the traditional method, meaning they were employees of an employer in Indiana, they are out of work through no fault of their own, and most coronavirus-related situations lead to them being out of work through no fault of their own. They're eligible for unemployment benefits. And just to take you all on a trip down memory lane, from about 2001, this chart doesn't even go back that far, but from about 2001 through 2011, where this chart bottoms out, Indiana had paid out more every year in unemployment benefits than it had received in revenues. It wasn't solely a recession-caused issue. We had paid out more each and every year. And so in 2001, legislative changes fixed that. You all probably remember that. Your federal taxes were adjusted a little bit through what they call food credit reductions, Federal Unemployment Tax Act. You also probably paid interest on the federal loan, paid a separate assessment for that, and your state rates changed. Well, through that work, really, up until the pandemic, we had reversed that trend, and we had paid in more each year. Employers had paid in more each year than we had paid out in unemployment benefits. But you can see here, as we move closer to the current time on this timeline, where that pandemic really hits and where that line starts to shoot down. And obviously, there was a point in time where we even were borrowing dollars from the federal government to pay claims. However, there are a couple of significant timelines that occur on January 1st, or were scheduled to occur, though some of that has been changed by Congress. One is it sort of starts the clock for a potential federal penalty, that food credit reduction, and also it would start the clock on interest. And so in order to avoid those potential consequences, money from the Coronavirus Relief Fund was transferred to the UI Trust Fund. So by the governor's order and with our Office of Management and Budget here, $400 million was transferred to the trust fund to avoid those consequences. And so you can see we went from borrowing about 120 million benefits to the positive. This chart shows at 264 million as of December. Today, that number is more like 230 million in our trust fund. But so, there will be work to do after this. Employers will be, facing the consequences of this for years to come. Shouldn't impact rates next year. Most of those merit rating notices have gone out, and you've received those or will receive them shortly. But this is really just setting the stage for, where these UI dollars come from, why fraud is important to the system, and I wanted to set the table there. So, Bob, unless there are other questions, I'll toss it back to you so that we can get really more into the fraud portion of today's discussion.
Okay, thanks, Josh. And again, we'll have everybody come back when we wrap things up for any questions that you may have. So do send us your questions. On the upper right-hand side, you'll see the option for that. Next up, Gina Ashley. Gina has done a wonderful job leading the team that has been combating fraud, but more importantly, getting the payments out in a timely manner to, I think, over 750,000 claimants, right, Gina, since we started during the pandemic back in March. So, Gina?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. And I'll keep my remarks brief so you can get to sort of the meat of the presentation, which is Jennifer Chappelle and Aaron Craven, but just want to set the stage a little bit with sort of the volume of claims and the historic year we've had. I'm sure you've all felt it in your communities. The first chart on the left just shows the number of unique claimants we have paid this year. You can see in January it was 28,000, and here going into the new year, we've paid over 787,000 unique claimants this year. And so, as you know, individuals file a weekly voucher. So week by week, they're filing a voucher to get paid. We have to do work typically on each one of those week's vouchers. So this just shows the actual unique individuals we've actually paid over that span time. Some getting paid for a few weeks at a time, and some getting paid for the whole entire time period by using some of the CARES Act extended programs. The next, if you look over on the right side, you can see the total benefits that we've paid out, and sort of goes along with Josh's last slide about the trust fund. Some of these benefits came from the state trust fund, and others came from the federal benefit programs. So you can see during this pandemic period, we paid out over $6 billion in benefits, the vast majority of those being federal benefits. So almost $5 billion of those being benefits from the federal government, with the rest being from the state trust fund. So in the midst of that, we implemented the new federal CARES Act programs. Those came out in March. As Josh mentioned, the Pandemic Unemployment Assistance Program was the big one, which was for individuals that were self-employed and independent contractors. Those individuals don't typically qualify for regular unemployment insurance, so that was a brand new program we had to set up. The other major program that came out of the CARES Act was the Pandemic Emergency Unemployment Compensation Program, and that provided an additional 13 weeks of benefits for those who exhausted unemployment insurance. And at the end of December, Congress extended those programs, and so we have been in the midst the last few weeks of also extending those programs in our system. They added some new requirements for eligibility, so we have been implementing those and have started paying those out over the last few weeks. Go ahead and go to the next slide. As the commissioner mentioned, we have had, one of the things we've really invested in is staff. We've had to scale up our staff in great amounts, and in addition to, we've had a lot of investments in technology. So if you look at our staff increases, prior to COVID, we had 436 employees within the unemployment insurance program. In November, we had over 1,000, and we're continuing to add staff on a daily basis. Just like you employers out there who are having challenges finding employees in some of your industries to do work, we're also having those challenges finding individuals that want to come work for the state of Indiana, but we are actively hiring and working with contractors also. Our contact center, that's sort of the first line of defense for a new claimant calling to find out, how do I apply for unemployment insurance, what are these new programs, as they've been filing and have questions about their claim. Right now, we're having a lot of questions about the 1099-G documents that individuals are getting. Some people don't understand that they're going to get that these benefits are taxed. So lots of those general questions come into our contact center. Prior to COVID, we had about 8,600 calls that we would receive in a week. That was early March. When the pandemic hit, that reached to 200 to 250,000 calls in a week. And these are just the ones that our phone lines would receive. So we did a lot of work in those first few weeks of the pandemic of really scaling up our call center so we'd be able to answer all those questions that individuals have. So you can see how the calls have sort of fluctuated throughout the last year, when we've had to roll out new programs, when we've had to roll back federal programs as they ended, those calls would spike. So we've been really busy the last few weeks with the Continued Assistance Act, which is the extension of the CARES Act. So we've been fielding lots of calls from individuals about those new and changed programs. We have really worked on the wait times. We've got them down to, I think, less than 3 minutes at times. And then again, in the month of December, we were a little bit busier. That was a time when the CARES Act was supposed to be ending. So people were really concerned about the ending of their benefits. And so we had a lot of phone calls during that time period. I think I can turn it over back to you, Bob, now.
Okay, hey, thanks, Gina. Well, I did have a question come in. So with an employer has a question either on fraud or something else related, but closely related. Should they call the call center or should they email? How should they contact us from an employer standpoint?
Yeah, the best thing is our 1-800 number contact center. There is an option if your employer to choose that option, and then you'll be routed to individuals who can answer employer questions. They can also escalate that. Jennifer Chappelle is our tax and trust fund accounting department. If it's really detailed questions that sort of our first line of defense can't answer, then they will transfer you to sort of a more experienced staff that can dive into your account if it's a really specific question. But yeah, the 1-800 number is really the best place to start.
Okay, well, thanks, Gina. That was a nice tee up for our next presenter, Jennifer Chappelle. Jennifer does a wide range of things with the UI team, but she's going to kind of take us through a little bit of the basics for unemployment insurance from an employer perspective. Jennifer, it's all yours.
Thank you. So I have been tasked with, in 5 minutes, telling you the most important things an employer needs to know. The first thing all employers should know is that the account needs to be registered promptly. Most employers have liability to pay unemployment insurance and make quarterly reporting to us on the same day that they issue their first payment to a person performing services in Indiana. If you need to get more information about what that means, please look at our employer handbook at unemployment.in.gov. It goes through all of the separate ways that an entity paying someone to perform services becomes a covered employer. For the most part, it is on the first dollar of payroll paid. For tax purposes, wages are wages when paid. For benefits purposes, wages are wages when earned. So there's always some confusion between the two different ways that your wage reports are used in a claim or for determining your liability. The second thing, if you transfer assets, including your workforce, please report that to the agency and submit any supporting documentation about the transfer of assets, including sales agreements, purchase agreements, bankruptcy orders if applicable, because what the agency does not know can hurt you. The next thing, if you want to keep up with your account in real time, please register for SIDE, which is the information data exchange system between the state and the employer or their third-party representative. When a person files a claim, you get notified within 1 business day that the claim has been filed and have an opportunity to respond to that claim filing, whether you are the base period employer or the separating employer or both. ESS, Employer Self-Service, is where you can see every notice that we sent you, every report you have filed in the last 10 years if you've been in business that long, every payment you've made us in the last 10 years, and how we've applied that money to your account. ESS has copies of everything that we have sent out to you in the last 2 years. Notify DWD immediately if you have a status change, a name change, or any other change that's going to affect your account, including the email that you want your notices sent to when we use email to do notifications. You can have as many internal users on our employer self-service account as you would like to have. No one has found the limit yet, which I am told is at least 9,999 users, and you can designate people to help represent you as external authorized users. So that's where you want to put your third-party representative that you want to have access into or insight into your ESS account. And you can limit the access and what they can do on the account anywhere from making them an administrator, which I refer to as having keys to the kingdom, or you can limit them to being able to look at one aspect only, such as benefit notifications. Read notices. I cannot tell you how many times we have been in a hearing or attempting to assist an employer whose account is unfortunately gone all the way to tax lien and warrant that simply tells us that, well, I didn't read that when you sent it. I thought I knew what it was, so I didn't read what it said. Please read the notices we send you. I am exceedingly frugal with your tax dollars and am not sending you anything that you do not need to know about. So please, if you don't understand, ask a question and protect your rights. Finally, I'm going to make another plug for our employer handbook and our agent handbook, because we have very robust living documents that we update routinely. I believe the employer handbook was updated no less than 6 times last year as different things occurred, different information was available. We made changes that affected you and the administration of your account because of legislative changes, regulatory changes, new programs, forms that were developed to assist you in reporting. Unemployment.in.gov is your friend. Please use it. And that's my 5 minutes.
Okay, Jennifer, hey, I'm going to keep you on for a couple questions that have come in, okay? Here is one. It says, why is it that sometimes when a claimant files a claim, even before the 10 days are up to for us to file a protest, we get a letter saying the former employee has won the claim and will start to receive UI benefits? Any comment on that? Does that really happen?
That, I think that it does. If the claimant has indicated a layoff, then they can get benefits almost immediately because the layoff is generally a clean claim. Now, we don't have a representative here from our adjudication division who could speak to that more thoroughly, but that is my tax understanding, that a clean claim can get paid if there is not a protestable reason. So where there has been a layoff, layoffs are payable because if an employer lays off a worker, the worker is automatically unemployed through no fault of their own. Oh, Gina's going to pop in because she's got a
I can help on that a little bit. So typically on a layoff, we still give that time frame for the employer to protest. During COVID, we had some COVID reasons that would pay out quicker. And so it would depend on how the claimant answered the questions. And so those were the reasons why some were getting paid quicker. It was only that sort of a limited number of individuals, and it was COVID specific.
Okay, and one more here. There's a sides question that came in. It said, can an employer have more than one person receive notification from sides?
I do not believe that would happen. You have to have a designated representative on sides or e-sides to whom the notice is sent.
Okay. All right, well, thanks, Jennifer. And again, she'll be coming back again when we're done here. So next up, let's bring on Aaron Craven, who's actually going to jump right in with fraud-specific information for that you need to know. Thanks, Aaron.
Thanks, Bob. So one of the main things I wanted to talk through here is the different types of fraud that we deal with. I think that with the pandemic, obviously ID theft is a huge source of fraud, but there's also a couple other types of fraud that we deal with. So I just wanted to hit on all of those. ID theft is just as it sounds. Somebody steals someone's identity, so their social security number, their name, date of birth, whatever it may be, and files an unemployment claim using that information. So a lot of times that information is available to fraudsters through the dark web, information that was obtained through breaches for different companies. I think we're all probably familiar that Experian was a huge company that had a major breach not too long ago. It was in the news, all of that. So, there's a lot of information out there on the dark web that can be purchased by fraudsters and used to file unemployment claims. So that's ID theft. The typical type of fraud we usually deal with in the unemployment system is falsification or misrepresentation. So that's typically when somebody is working while claiming benefits at the same time, or they're earning some type of income while they're filing for benefits and not reporting the income received or underreporting the income received. That's the typical fraud that we're used to dealing with. So the ID theft, while we've definitely seen it in the unemployment insurance system, the numbers have drastically increased during the pandemic. The third type of fraud that we're seeing is account takeovers, which is essentially when a legitimate claimant files an unemployment claim, and then at some point in their claim, somebody hijacks their account. They are, you know, a lot of people use the same password over and over again for multiple different websites, and so that information is made available to fraudsters on the dark web or, you know, wherever, and that individual is able to hack into somebody's account and file weeks on their behalf or change their banking information to have funds diverted. So that is definitely a new type of fraud that we haven't really dealt with in the past. So those are the three main types of fraud we are seeing right now. In Indiana, fraud really picked up in July during the pandemic. I think that there were a few other states who it really started to hit earlier, but for Indiana, it mostly picked up in July. So in response to some of the new things we're seeing, the increase in fraud, we implemented a number of new detection measures. So some of the things we did was we did some enhanced analytics to identify common patterns that we were seeing and notified about. There was one, just to give you an example, involving the Gmail platform for email. Apparently, if you use dots in between the letters in your Gmail accounts, it all goes to the same account. So I could have aaron.craven@gmail.com or Aaron Craven with no dot in the middle, and it would still go to the Aaron Craven gmail.com email address. So a lot of fraudsters picked up on that and just started inserting all these random dots in their email address, and it would make it very easy for them to track all the unemployment claims because it looks like a different email address in our system, but all the communication went to the same email. So that was one really big pattern that happened over the summer that we picked up and had to enhance our analytics to look for. Another thing that we did is partner with ID.me to do our identity verifications. We now have used ID.me as a front-end solution so that pretty much all of our claimants have to verify their identity through this identity verification service before they can get paid. So we have noticed a huge return on investment with ID.me in the past few months where they've been partnering with the state. So I'm really happy to have them on board to help us identify the identity theft. We've also partnered with the NASWA's Integrity Data Hub, which is basically just a cross match so that we can see where where claimants are filing in multiple states or other states report out on suspicious things that they're seeing. So that's been a really great resource for us in identifying fraud. And then also information sharing with federal and state law enforcement. We work very closely with the Indiana State Police, in addition to the FBI, the OIG, the Attorney General's office, multiple different levels of law enforcement on some of the fraud that we're seeing. So we also are working with banks to help identify perpetrators. I'm sure that you guys have seen in the news that there's a lot of different banks in which you can, so the majority of we allow direct deposit. The majority of claimants will, who use direct deposit will go through, one of the more common banks when you're talking about Chase, all of those banks. But then there's this certain, these like preloaded bank cards that you can get from Walmart, and there's various banks that offer them, which you essentially don't need a social security number or anything to really sign up for them. So those banks have really been a gold mine for fraudsters to be able to get these fraudulent funds. So we've been dealing with a lot of that, and there's some difficulty identifying perpetrators that are using those types of preloaded debit cards. So that's one thing that we have seen. We have also increased our security to detect for bot activity. We've started notifying claimants when there's been a change to their bank accounts. We've implemented two-factor authentication for bank account changes. So those are just a few of the increased security things that we've done in response to fraud. So I know it was mentioned already that as employers, you guys are really our best line of defense. What you can do as an employer is make sure that you're protesting claims promptly. And then additionally, we have a fraud reporting email inbox that you can send fraudulent tips to help us expedite the process and stopping the claim from receiving any future payments until we can figure out what's going on. So just, I know we get a lot of questions on what happens once I submit a tip. Why haven't I been contacted? So we read every single tip that we receive and we take the appropriate action, whether it's opening a fraud case, looking more into the eligibility. So we're taking the appropriate actions with that, but just with the volume that we've been seeing, we're not able to respond to each and every tip that we receive. But I assure you, we are taking the appropriate action in the fraud unit. So as I had mentioned in the past, we have dealt with a lot of identity theft during the pandemic. Prior to the pandemic, we only dealt really with a handful of identity theft per year. We were dealing with way more during this pandemic. So we have definitely had to make a lot of changes in our processes to address the increase in identity theft. So when identity theft is reported to us, our first step that we take is to revoke the account pending investigation, just to confirm that the identity theft occurred. By revoking the account, we're preventing any future payments from going out to the individual who filed the claim. Now we are also suppressing any notices during the investigation. Previously, when we'd revoke a claim, if adjudication had worked an item, a work item associated with the claim that resulted in overpayment notices may have gone out to the victim. So we are now suppressing those notices as well, pending our final determination on the ID thefts. And so if you do have any employees who did receive an overpayment notice, just have them contact the phone number on the notice and we will get that fixed in the system so they do not receive any future notices until our investigation is completed. Because as I mentioned, that was a change in process, so there may have been some notices that went out in the past. So once we are able to confirm ID theft after our investigation, we will disassociate the claim from the victim's personal information and move the employer charges to a fraud shell. So employer relief of charges. Sorry, you guys can move forward a couple slides. One more. Yes. So employer relief of charges. This is a question we get a lot from employers as well. Employers will be relieved of charges if, so let's walk through, we'll talk separately about contributory and reimbursable accounts because the process is a little different. So, and this only pertains to claims where payments were made to the fraudster. So if there were no payments that went out, there's no relief of charges that needs to happen from the employer, obviously. So for contributory employers, anytime we set up an overpayment, so at the conclusion of our investigation, or if it's an adjudication item, anytime an overpayment set up, it's relieving the contributory employer of those charges. So they'll be relieved as soon as the investigation is completed and the overpayment's established. For reimbursable employers, this is a little bit more of a complicated process on our end. So we will relieve reimbursable employers of charges if we determine there is identity theft involved, which means that, to our knowledge, we determined that we did not pay a legitimate employee of that employer at the conclusion of our investigation. So if that's our determination, we will relieve the reimbursable employer from those charges. That can take some time to occur. We are very backlogged in our investigations right now, and this is a new process for us as we haven't done this in the past. So we're working through a few things on our end to make sure that we get those charges relieved. So what we've been recommending, if you're a reimbursable employer, just to pay those charges, go ahead and pay them, and then we will credit you once the investigation has concluded. Yeah, like I mentioned, these investigations are going to take some time, definitely backlogged in fraud. So the last thing I wanted to touch on was identity theft in the 1099-Gs. We're getting a lot of questions about that as the 1099-Gs have been issued. So we, in general, a claimant is issued a 1099 electronically through Uplink if they've received benefits in that year. So this will include identity thefts, our cases of identity theft. So our ID theft victims may end up receiving a 1099 unless we have completed the identity theft investigation in 2020, then we will have successfully suppressed the notice. If we have not yet completed the investigation to confirm the identity theft, they may still be issued a 1099 or a notice that lets them know that a 1099 it was issued for them electronically. So this is an evolving process that we're working with the IRS on. We realize that we're going to have to issue a lot of 1099 corrections for victims of identity theft. So we have actually updated our website to provide some information to individuals about the 1099s. So our best advice to you at this point is just to look at our website, refresh it, and make sure that you have the most current information. We're adding to it daily so that you guys have information about the 1099s, and if you have an employee that was a victim of fraud, how they can obtain a corrected 1099. So that's all I have.
Okay. Hey, thanks, Erin. I got a couple for you. We got lots of questions coming in, and again, a reminder: keep sending those, and we're not going to be able to get to all of them today. And someone from the team will get back to with all the responses back to you directly. But some of those we will get to right now. So, Erin, one of the things was what email address should be used to report fraud?
Yeah. So sorry, it was in one of those slides, and I probably just didn't have you flip through them. I apologize for that. It's benefitfraudreporting@dwd.in.gov.
Okay, and then another question on when ID.me was implemented. They want to know when did we start using that?
I'm trying to recall. I think it was late September when we first started using ID.me. Previously, we had done a cross-match with the Social Security Administration. And we were seeing a lot of some false positives come back from that. So we decided that we wanted to sort of enhance our identity verification, and that's when we decided to partner with ID.me to do all of our identity verifications on the front end.
Okay, well let's. I'm going to bring the others back in here, and I'm just going to start.
Yeah, Bob,
go ahead, Gina.
Yeah, I'll also add to that. So in the sort of early summer, we did implement some increased identity verification procedures that we used sort of across the board on claimants. And then when we moved to ID.me, we sort of used them on sort of segment of the population. And now we've moved to use that sort of across the board with all of our claimants. So we have been doing enhanced identity verification since the beginning of the summer.
Okay, thanks, Gina. And next one I'm going to throw out to you, Josh. And again, anybody else, feel free to jump in. We've had some questions on breaches. How do they come? Is the employer? Is it DWD? What can you share with us on breaches in general?
Well, so I mean, the truth is that it's hard to rule anything out. They're coming from anywhere and everywhere. Basically, if someone can get their hands on stolen data, it's potentially risky. But one of the first questions that a lot of employers have is, hey, I've had a couple of fraudulent claims. Does that mean that I've been breached as an employer? And I would say that generally, our best indication and through the reading that we've done and through the information from our partners is most of this is likely information that's been in some of these big data breaches that you've read about in the news over the years. And essentially, there wasn't a way to monetize that stolen information. And these PUA program has really created an avenue to make effective use of stolen data. So, while it's not really easy for us to rule out in any given case that your employer has the problem, it's really probably not the first, it's probably not the thing that you should suspect the most. It's probably from one of these other breaches. Obviously, if that's really widespread, if you're looking at 100% of your staff, you've got a little bit of a different story, but we're not seeing that much. Our indication is from different breaches. Sometimes people ask, this information come from DWD? Again, it doesn't, there's no indication that it did. Obviously, they're using the information through our systems, but no information that the data comes from us. And in fact, we see a lot of interesting things in this data. Sometimes it will be a correct address of the person that they're filing in. Sometimes it'll be an old address. Sometimes it will be a seemingly made up address or an address where the individual can get access to, the fraudulent individual can get access to the information that's sent out. And so it really covers the whole field. But I think that in most cases, it should probably not be your first concern that the information came from your entity itself.
Hey, and the next question, Jennifer Chappelle, I'm going to send it your way. We've got a few asking a similar question on what is required to file a claim. They're worried about if their social security number has been stolen. So specifically, can you speak to that question?
I'm not in adjudication, but to file a claim with the Department of Workforce Development, you have to know your name, your social security number as it was reported by an Indiana employer for regular UI, your address, your date of birth, the day on which you separated, and I think and why you separated. And then you have to answer a voucher that talks about your unemployment, reason for separation, verify former employers, that sort of thing. But basically, you just have to know demographic information about yourself, and it has to match our records in terms of your employment history in order to have monetary qualification.
Okay, thanks, Jennifer. Anything else you want to add to that, Gina? Okay, Gina, I'm going to go to you. If you can speak to the technology, had a couple of questions on Uplink and how that has performed through the pandemic and how that really, as a result of advances that were made over the years in preparation. Can you speak to the technology for just a second?
Sure. Contrary to some reports, we do have a modernized IT system. There are some states that have been working for years to modernize their IT systems and do have pretty antiquated systems. In the early parts of the pandemic, they did have issues with just having their system up and people being able to access their system. This is one of the reasons why early in the pandemic, some of those states didn't show that they had large claims being filed, and they looked like they were processing claims pretty quickly. Our system was able to take all those claims in, and we had virtually no downtime. We did have, instances where it ran slow. As soon as we saw some of that occurring, we put, extra. I'm not an IT expert, so we put extra things in place so that our people wouldn't get kicked out of the system. They'd be sent to an overflow page. They can come back in. Sundays are always our busiest time. People want to file on Sunday. It's the first day of the week they can file, so they can get paid on Monday. So we've encouraged people early on when we had sort of the 300,000 people filing at a time to say, if you can file later in the week, that's better than filing on Sunday. But for the most part, our system has performed remarkably well under all of the things that have been thrown our way, the new programs, the fraudsters attacking our system. A lot of states have had to take their systems down and offline for days to deal with things. We have not had to do those type of things, so we're very thankful for that.
Okay, thanks for that, Gina. And again, we see those stories all the time of technical problems going on all around the country, but fortunately not here in Indiana yet. We're going to pause on the questions for just a second. We got some more slides I think Dave's going to put up. So let's see where we're going to go here. Okay. And Josh, can you speak to this? I mean, we've been getting information out there and press releases and different things. And so I guess stay informed is kind of a message and stay in touch.
Yeah, I think that's right. Unfortunately, things have changed so rapidly and so dramatically from time to time that a lot of times it's hard to be as proactive as we'd like to. I mean, many of these programs that we've implemented were not things that were ever discussed prior to the pandemic. And so we're learning about them on the fly as we work through it. And so we're working hard to get the information out as soon as we can, both in terms of the availability of the programs we have and also as it pertains to fraud, as we see new schemes and adapt to them. It's always a really difficult challenge. One of the things that's very important to the agency is to get benefits to out of work Hoosiers who meet the eligibility requirements for them as soon as possible. And so, every time we add something like an ID.me, and it's a very good tool and it's been very effective, we always worry about the impact that will have on a claimant, and sometimes it is an extra hurdle to jump through. And I think some of those have occurred with employers as well, but we're working hard on this, and we're working hard to keep the information out, and so it is changing rapidly. Do look for our different methods of communication.
Okay, got a couple more slides here. Let's, yeah, I mean, you can see how large the numbers are, and that's USA Today reporting on this. This is a national problem, right?
Yeah, and again, really, as I said in the beginning, I think that Indiana, I'm confident that as we get through this, we'll look and see that our quick actions and the fact that we have a modernized system has been helpful. But we're not going to be immune to this, and certainly we know that we're being attacked daily by people trying to obtain fraudulent benefits, and it's the creativity of these scams has sometimes shocked and surprised us, but. We continue to adapt, and it doesn't appear to be going away anytime soon, and it is likely to stay with us as long as these enhanced federal benefit programs remain.
And
Yeah,
Gina,
I
that,
just like to sort of,
go ahead, Gina. Go
yeah, I
ahead.
was gonna say, I'd just like to put an exclamation point on that. I mean, we moved to ID.me for ID verification, across all of our UI program, we said earlier. And, they're not immune from attacks. I mean, they have been doing this for a while. They provide the verification for IRS, Social Security Administration. And in the month of December, they had billions of attacks on their system. So, they know that more state UI, the fraudsters know that more state UI systems are using more sophisticated methods to verify identity. And so the fraudsters are now attacking those methods as a way to get through to our systems also. So, there is a lot of money at stake, and the fraudsters are trying to find it.
Gina, I know on that last slide prior to this, it referenced that story, the elderly woman who got an overpayment, and she called in to want to know how much she owed. Can you share that story?
Aaron probably can do a better job than I can sharing that story.
I'm trying to remember exactly what story that was. I think we had somebody, and I'm not sure if it's the same story you're talking about, but I can talk about this one. An individual who, she was basically a victim of phishing. So somebody had, a fraudster had, I guess, sent her a link saying, click here to claim your prize. And so she clicked on the link, and it took her to ID.me to verify her identity. And then once she got there, they were like, you're doing this to receive unemployment benefits in the state of Indiana. And she had no idea she was just there to collect her prize. So they're definitely seeing a lot of phishing and things like that from the fraudsters. So and definitely youth as well has been a little bit of a target, just because they don't really have a whole lot of credit history or anything to really verify with when they're verifying their identity. So I think elderly and definitely some of our youth populations have been unfortunately victims of fraud.
Okay, we got some more slides we want to share, and then we're going to jump back into some the questions for the discussion. Here's the resources. I think that really kind of shows this is a screenshot of the things that are out there. Anybody want to add anything to these?
Now, this is just our fraud reporting website, or our fraud website. It gives you a lot of information about just how to report fraud, some different press releases. There's also a little blurb on there about how you can file a police report if you're a victim of identity theft. You can do so electronically. There's an inbox that they've set up to take in all of those reports, and a PDF link there for you to fill out. So this is our go-to page for any up-to-date information on fraud resources.
Okay, I know that's constantly being updated. Thanks for sharing that, Aaron. Next up, I think we have, so then Aaron, you referred to the big spike, and Josh or Aaron, what happened in that week in late June?
Yeah, so, and I'll go ahead and talk through this one, but first, I almost wish that you could see this slide going back years, because there is nothing normal here. This almost would lead you to believe that somewhere around 12,000 claims a week was somewhat normal, but you can see just what an abnormal year this has been for Indiana. If this were to go back into those months and in January and February, they would be tiny on this graph, wouldn't rise near the level. But so as you could see going along here, that week in June, you all know that, I mean, as the pandemic really sat in March, we started to see really high claims volume. The second, third, fourth week of March, I guess really more the third and the fourth week of March, as some of the mandatory shutdowns took place. And you can see those initial claims for unemployment benefits start to taper down and taper down and taper down. Well, as we looked at our data on June 20th, it seemed a little bit suspicious that we would see that jump up again. I mean, we know that the economy has had some ripple effects and that there have continued to be individuals displaced by pandemic-related events. but it was suspicious because we don't normally see a jump like that in those summer months, and we had seen it taper off. But then in that week in June, as we saw those initial claims filed, and that's what this is. This is the number of initial claims filed. It doesn't mean that people received benefits in those weeks. It means that the claims were there. This was a really solid indicator that we had become the most recent target for unemployment fraud. The state of Washington really was probably the first into this. They reported hundreds of millions of dollars that they had paid out in May. And I think that as some states shut down systems, there was sort of some forum shopping where individuals would try in different states. I do think that one of the things, this is more speculative, but because we have a modernized system and because our system is capable of providing feedback so quickly, and the work that we did to stand up our PUA program and its quick feedback, I think allowed people that were attempting these fraudulent claims to know really quickly whether they had successfully gotten something through or not. And I think that that feedback was positive. Again, I think that the drop in claims that you see going forward tell you that they probably weren't as successful as they had hoped to be. Otherwise, we would have continued to see that growth. But again, some of this is speculative because it's going to take a long time for us to really do this look back. And when I say we, I mean nationally. The U.S. Department of Labor is involved, the Secret Service is involved, the FBI are involved in UI fraud. And it's going to take a while to look at exactly what happened in this run through. But this is just the chart that shows you sort of when we had that moment where we could tell that we needed to double down on our efforts, and the amount of work that's been done within our agency since that time in June has really been significant. Fraud has been at least a weekly, really a daily issue for our Office of Unemployment Insurance, as they've tried to protect Hoosier taxpayers, and at the same time deliver benefits to individuals that were entitled to them.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, and I'll just add that just to clarify that this is also claims filed. I think that there's a lot of confusion on claims filed versus claims paid. And so these are UI claims that were filed. In Indiana, we require everybody to file a UI claim and get denied on that before they can move over to PUA. So that's why we've seen a large uptick in the UI claims filed. They're then denied. They move over to PUA to file that, where most of the fraud is occurring. So just wanted to point that out too.
Okay, and I think we got a couple more slides, and then again, we got about 10 minutes to wind down with here. This is just some slides that we put together, and you can just see these are more local stories that started way back late spring, and they really have not let up, and fraud really has become even more dominant in the last couple of months. And so certainly a great interest on the media side, and we're trying to put out as much information as we can. So with that, we got about 8 more minutes, I see. So let's we need to also, let's get a thank you in here, because we need to thank so many of you that have played a role on getting the audience here today. I know we reached out to our friends at the Indiana Manufacturers Association, the Indiana Chamber of Commerce, the Indiana Hospital Association. I think Tyler Ness. Tyler, if you're still on, any other words that you want to pass along before we get into another round of questions?
I have nothing to add to what all these employers have heard, so I will mute my microphone.
Okay, thanks, Tyler, and thanks for your help, Tyler, on bringing this group together, because we reached a wide swath with today's program, and I think we were really pleased with the turnout that we got for today. So let's jump back into some questions. I got multiple questions on the 1099-G issue. If there's income tax discrepancies, what people need to know and be aware of if they happen to get a 1099 for taxes on a claim that they never filed. Can anybody help with that?
Yeah, I can answer that question. So if they receive a 1099, they just need to make sure, if they've already reported fraud to us, then we're likely already aware of it and working on investigating it. It doesn't hurt to go ahead and report it again, though, if they want to just if they want to do that, just to make sure. But I think that if they haven't reported it, definitely make sure that they jump onto our fraud website and report it as soon as possible. And then,
okay,
like I mentioned before, at the conclusion of our investigation, we will issue a corrected 1099 once we're able to confirm the identity theft.
Okay, the next question, if an employee, this happened with one of the participants today, if an employee files a claim while being employed fraudulently, we send the notice back to DWD. What happens next? And do we ever find out the results?
I'll handle that one.
Okay.
Claimants have a right to privacy. So you will not be directly notified except if we pursue criminal prosecution against any individual for unemployment insurance claim fraud. However, if the agency finds that the person received benefits to which they were not entitled and you are a contributory employer, you will see the amounts credited back on your statement of benefit charges in the same month that we determine that the person received an improper payment. So that's a way that you can tell that the matter has been resolved. If you are a reimbursable employer, you will not know that way because the credit appears on your statement of benefit charges only if and when we recover money from the person who collected the benefits to which they were not entitled. It's an issue of the privacy of the individual versus the business's need to know. And from the perspective of your unemployment insurance, what you need to know as an employer is whether or not you've been charged with the benefit. So if it is an improper payment and it is not related to fraud, you likely will never know that. If you have filed a specific protest with regard to the person's employment status, you will receive a determination of eligibility that indicates how that was adjudicated. I hope that answers it.
Sure. Thanks, Jennifer. I do got a note here, the earlier question about sides and multiple email addresses. There is only one email address that can be used currently with sides. So thanks for getting us that information. Okay, so here's a similar question to that. I don't know if you want to take this to Jennifer or Aaron or anyone. It says, I filed a personal ID theft claim in November. Is there a way to learn the outcome or result of that fraudulent claim?
So I'm assuming this person was a victim of identity theft and they filed a report with us letting us know that they were a victim. So if they have a question as to whether we've been able to confirm the ID theft and if a 1099 has been issued, they can reach out to our fraud department and we can provide that information. We're hoping in 2021 to actually send out notification once we've concluded the fraud investigation so that they're aware, yes, we've confirmed the fraud, here's your corrected 1099. So we're working on improving that process a little bit so that it's more clear to the victim on the outcome of the case. But if there's any question, feel free to reach out to the fraud department. We can let you know where that stands.
Okay, here's another question. It says, we received a statement showing our account has negative charges. What does that mean?
That means that we have restored originally charged benefits. The situation I was discussing before where the agency determines that collection was improper payment has been made to a claimant, your statement of benefit charges reflects the credit at such time as a contributory employer that we make that determination that the person has an overpayment, and as a reimbursable employer, when we have received money back from the individual, you get a credit on your account for that through your statement of benefit charges. The statement of benefit charges lists the claimant. It lists the week ending for which the monies have been credited back or received back, and the net effect on your either invoice or your experience balance account.
Okay, I know here's a question. I know part of the goal is to pay eligible claimants as soon as possible, but again, the key word being eligible. With the large number of claims, is there any consideration given to increasing the response time for employers? Has that been discussed?
The response time for employers is statutory.
Oh, okay, very good answer. I had a question here about the slides. They wanted to know if they can have this information. Again, just another reminder that today's program is being recorded. And with that, we've just about hit the top of the hour. So I'm gonna go down one more time to see if there's any final comments. I wanna start with you, Aaron. Any final words for folks that they can take away or reminders, anything else from you?
I just want to reiterate that we really rely on employers to provide this information to us. So they are our best line of defense. So I think that the quicker they see this and can notify us, the sooner we can get the claim shut down and get it taken care of. So just wanted to make sure that that was reiterated and that employers understand that they are extremely valuable to us in detecting fraud.
Okay, and a big thank you to you, Aaron, and for leading the fraud unit and all you do in such a difficult year. Jennifer Chappelle, any other final comments from you?
Mine echo Aaron. Stay informed, protect your rights, and use the resources that are available to you at unemployment.in.gov to accomplish both.
Josh Richardson.
Yeah, well, really, you've talked with the experts already. You know, our UI division has worked incredibly hard on this. You know, we're fighting two pretty different but extreme priorities, and that is to get the benefits to people who are entitled to them as quickly as possible while not letting a dollar go out fraudulently. Those things do conflict at times. We've worked very hard throughout this to try to strike that right balance and continue to add tools and continue to get better at it on a daily basis. And we'll count on your support as we do that and to provide us information we can use to make those decisions. So thank you all for attending today.
Thanks, Josh. And Gina, I know your plate has been over full since March, and following today's program, we'll be sending you a lot of really good questions that we weren't able to get to today. So I just want to let you know that's coming, and your final thoughts.
Sure, I appreciate the questions. I appreciate everyone joining us today. The more information that we can share and that you can share with others, the better we all are. We know sometimes it's hard, particularly for claimants, to navigate the system. Employers are typically more sophisticated. So we thank you, particularly a lot of you, for in the early days of the pandemic when everything was shut down. For a lot of you opened up your businesses so claimants could come in and they could file on your computers. We do have telephone filing, but it's not the best thing for a claimant. It's better when they can sit down and see their account and answer the questions and read them. So I just really want to thank you for being partners. We're not out of this yet, so I'll thank you for what you've done so far and what we're going to continue to ask you to do as we partner with you moving forward.
Okay, and with that, a final reminder that a recording of today's program will hit your inbox about this time tomorrow, so be on the lookout for that. And again, you'll be able to share that with others, and the team here will be getting back to you with answers to the questions we did not get to. So with that, thanks for all of you that joined us today, and especially those that shared the information and helped us on getting the word out. So with that, we're going to conclude today's program. Have a great rest of your day.